the sound of that, weirdly. How's everybody doing tonight? Thank you for coming out for this comedy show. Oh no, wait, that's what I said. It is apparently homecoming weekend, which I feel like I should have known more about, but I don't. Nor do I care that much. I'm impressed by this audience. It's a nearly packed house, which is amazing. A few announcements before we get going. Tomorrow night, SGLA is hosting their Rough Drafts reading, and that's at Full Circle Brewing Company downtown. Starts at 6 p.m. Drafts and drafts. So please show up for that. Support our first-year MFA students who will be reading their work. Next week, we have, on one night, 3 poetry readings, I believe, and that's on the 19th. One of our alumni, Sasha Pimentel, will be reading, and that's also at Full Circle. I believe it's at 7 p.m. 7. But she's also doing a pop-up workshop at Clegg Coffee Shop in the Tower. And if you haven't been to the new coffee shop down there, it's really cool and hip. Lots of white tiles and toast. But that's at, if I'm not mistaken, at 2 p.m. So please come out and support Sasha, who's an amazing poet. National acclaim, recently had a piece in the New York Times Magazine, makes us all look really, really good. But there's a couple of other readings that night as well. I know Aaron Pachigian is reading here on campus in McLean. Is it 121?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And Joseph Rios is reading to launch his new book, Shadowboxing, the boxing gym on Van Ness, and I'm sorry I forgot the address so that someone could shout it out. I'll announce that, but that's also that night. So it's a night of poetry next Thursday, and then for MFA students and other folks, the MFA party is on Friday, the 20th, at John and Connie's house, across the street from me, so it's a really easy commute for me. And then upcoming events, we have quite a few things on the schedule, but I'll just mention one just because it's more recent. Sean Wen, author of A 20-Minute Silence Followed by a Pause, will be reading on November 2nd right here. A few thanks tonight to my colleagues. I love reading with you all. It's one of my favorite events of the year. To our Dean, Saul Jimenez Sandoval, to our Department Chair, Lisa Weston, to Jefferson for all that he does to keep things rolling, and to all of you for being here tonight. Thank you very much. We will be selling books outside or out in the lobby, and most of the money of that is going to student scholarships. So buy books, support our students. Unless I'm forgetting something, someone please yell out if I am. The order tonight, I'll read first, and then Connie, then John, then Randa, and then Tim. And we will have a reception afterward, a modest reception. With like, nuts and stuff. Okay, so again, I love this reading. This is one of my favorite events of the year. And I really appreciate everybody being here. I have a reading in the spring from my new book, so I thought instead I'd just read from one of my older books. And this is from my book, Theoretical Killings, Essays and Accidents. And in the new book, I have kind of revision of this piece, where I pretty much ignore everything that I say in this piece. So this is a piece called How Not to Tell a Story About Blood in a Bathtub, an essay on form. And it begins with an epigraph. In the final analysis, real suspense comes with moral dilemma and the courage to make and act upon choices. John Gardner, The Art of Fiction. Do not say, you're gonna love this. You're setting yourself up for failure beginning this way. Don't rush it, don't go. So there were like bloody chunks of flesh in the bathtub you were supposed to fix, but you were like, no way, and cursing. And then like out of nowhere, this guy shows up, the guy who's staying at the condominium, and he's wearing this cardigan sweater, and that's all you remember of him for some reason. This cardigan sweater, yellow, you think, and he's just standing there smiling, and you're thinking he's gonna kill you or something, like Mr. Rogers out for blood, just beating you senseless with his brown shoe or a crowbar or one of those screeching puppets from his show, and like draping your body with his sweater, a cardigan wrapped corpse, and then breathe. Do not tell us about Stinky, your insipid supervisor, and the way he peels his eyes at you when you tell him about the call last night on the emergency line. Don't spend pages and pages describing his chronic halitosis or the various nicknames, ass mouth, stink face, dragon breath, or about the time you tried some sort of pathetic intervention involving a long discussion about the joys and benefits of toothbrushing. Skip all of that. Just tell us what you told Stinky the morning after those menacing statements about how you had, in fact, shut the door on a bathtub covered in blood, drove home, and went back to sleep next to the mammal-warm body of your girlfriend. This is enough. It raises exactly the sort of questions you want your reader to ask. Don't feign disinterest in ambulances and sirens and phone calls from guys in uniforms. These provide important texture because you want your readers to think they know what happened. Start with the phone call, the voice, the call for help. You want to set these expectations. You want to leave us wondering about the man in that ubiquitous cardigan sweater, his soft voice like the whisper of. Do not start with the blood. Build up to this. Begin with the hard scrape of snow shovels on concrete walkways. Begin with tourists' toilets, running, clogged, overflowing, flat busted, refrigerators clanking, water heaters mysteriously unable to provide the endless supply of hot water that a family of 6 demands. You don't need to waste time with the mundane details of the job. The hours you spend delivering and collecting towels, or the times you've fallen asleep in units where you were supposed to fix a closet door and instead sat down to watch basketball or Jerry Springer. None of this is important. Begin with a cell phone call, 10:30 at night, the high-pitched ring, and you are thinking anything but this. Begin formally with John Gardner, the pompous ass, and all that crap about real suspense. But aren't we all interested in false suspense? Begin with the anguish of moral choice. Damn it, if he's not right, even in an essay like this. Move on to the voice at the other end of the line, maybe the man in the cardigan sweater. We've got blood in our bathtub, and well, it just won't go down. What would you do? Do not repeat blood in the bathtub, blood in the bathtub. The refrain begins to sound like a U2 song or Midnight Oil or the words of some other band with interesting accents and a video. Blood in the bathtub and the world stops turning. This is not a mantra we need any longer, or perhaps it's Psycho we see, the slumping figure of Janet Leigh and the pop, pop, pop of the shower curtain pulling loose, her eye-open face pressed against the tile floor. Either way, it yanks us out of the story. You know the one about the man and the yellow. Do not mention irrelevant information, such as the name of your favorite breakfast place, the Blue Moose, or how much you like DeWalt power tools, or the innumerable benefits of Sorel Mugluck boots, or mention the stinging joy of first chair in the morning before all the tourists wake, the hard crunch of the vinyl pads still caked with fresh snow, or the early morning silence on the mountain and your envy for first tracks through a field of knee-deep powder. the actual feeling of floating on champagne snow. Sometimes there will be spontaneous whooping, but none of this has any bearing on the story. Do not characterize the man in the cardigan sweater as some kind of menace, making not so subtle references to his similarity in size and presence to Marlon Brando, either from The Godfather or Apocalypse Now. You play with our expectations this way, as if the hapless maintenance man has unwittingly stumbled into the twisted plot of a gang-style execution. We're going to see this coming. We're not going to believe this. We'll recognize the narrator's heavy hand, the overt foreshadowing, and the repeated mention of that yellow cardigan sweater. Just the absurdity of it makes it seem menacing, right? We're going to see him for what he is, a construct, a conceit, a prop for your tale. Do not characterize yourself as some sort of Mr. Fix-It Messiah, someone suffering for the sins of all vacationers, the healer of toilets, the stopper of leaks, the builder of fires, even if one guy from Florida did pay you $20 to work your fire magic, or try to elevate yourself above your situation. Be honest. You muddy up the waters unnecessarily with talk of delayed dreams and a community culture centered on the snow report and televised cartoons about foul-mouthed 8-year-olds. Leave out mention of the cost of a gallon of milk or how much you pay for rent. All of this feels like an attempt to make it seem like there's more at stake for you than there really is. Do not end with blood in the bathtub. Not that image. Not the slivers of flesh like little fish caught in the drain. Not the knit of a cardigan sweater or a saffron color of yellow, so lewd in this picture. Do not tell us the truth about the soft tissue of the esophagus, tears in the wall, holes, and the stomach full of blood, because you have no idea how someone tears a hole in his esophagus. This is not something you can explain. Do not tell us unless it's to mention that strange feeling you had when Stinky told you the truth. Standing in the maintenance office, surrounded by mountains of towels and sheets and tools, a swirl of relief and deep disappointment as you watched your story gather up its tangents, sprout wings, and flap out the window, ducking first below your sight line, then rising up and just clearing the tops of the lodgepole pines before spreading its words and drifting over the valley, dissipated, diffused, gone. Thanks. And I'm very happy to introduce my colleague, one of my favorite poets in the world, Connie Hales.
Is that okay? Stephen's a lot taller than me. Most people are a lot taller than me. And John Gardner was my old teacher. He was sort of a pompous ass. Really smart pompous ass. So the first poem I'm going to read is a sort of longish poem that I started to work on several years ago, but I abandoned it in frustration. And so I apologize. I think I read it once before, so it's not that bad anymore. I picked it up, worked on it some more. I intended to actually cut it down, and you know how that happens. It was sort of long. I thought I'll cut the crap out of it. I'll make it short. So then I ended up sort of turning it inside out and actually expanding it so it's even longer. So we'll see how this sounds out loud. It's in 9 numbered sections. I'll just read the numbers between each section. It's pretty straightforward. I don't think I don't think there's anything I have to explain. The poem is called Secure, and it's about locks. Let's see. Secure. 1. It takes a razor blade to break the paint seal before I can unscrew metal plates from each drawer front and cabinet in the upstairs bathroom, and I have to whack my hammer on a screwdriver to pop off each piece. I move from room to room in our new old house, detaching hook and loop locks, slide bolts, and padlock fittings, their stiff U-shaped flaps hanging like hollow tones from nearly every closet, cupboard, cabinet door in this house, shocked at the sheer number of them. I understand the need to secure household chemicals, sharp tools and instruments, but this feels excessive. Maybe the previous owners had a pack of children. Maybe they kept some serious medications. Maybe they were selling drugs like my ex-husband's old friends. Maybe they had guns. I recall a padlocked linen cabinet in another house years ago, stocked with 3 foil-wrapped bricks of cocaine, nestled between stacks of folded blue bath towels, a pile of matching face cloths, and a Western-style revolver. I snapped a chain across the door with wire cutters, continued prying lock parts from doors and jambs, chip paint out of screw slots and slide bolts, drill out strip screws, remove each pointed hook and its gaping steel eye. 2. When my cousin moved his young family into a new brick house on a busy highway, he installed a chain link fence around the yard, attached deadbolt locks with removable keys on all outside doors. One winter night, as usual, after the children had been bathed, read to, and had finally fallen asleep, my cousin dutifully secured the house before climbing into bed next to his wife. The fire started later, near the master bedroom, and the children in their separate rooms were awakened by something, a dog, an alarm, who knows. The parents never made it downstairs, but my cousin's children were found, all 4 of them, in a smoky, dead heap at the bolted back door, the blackened key still sitting on top of the refrigerator, out of their reach. 3. My childhood home had a flimsy button lock on the inside front doorknob and a small sliding bolt on the back door. Neither could actually keep anyone out, and neither was meant to keep anyone inside. The narrow cupboard above the sink that held my father's epilepsy medicine was open. The simple hook lock in the bathroom could be easily flipped with a butter knife. And the push-up sash windows, perpetually cracked or broken out, were repaired with tape and cardboard, so the barrier between inside and outside was permeable, more illusion than effect. In fact, I don't recall any belief in or even understanding of the notion of physical security. I don't recall the possibility of safe haven as a child. It never occurred to me in those days that home should be a safer place than any other place. My father's violent rages, for instance, were not outside threats, and most of our neighbors lived and breathed in the same angry air, so our focus was on getting out rather than hunkering down, running rather than hiding. My mother would boost me through a bedroom window with 2 or 3 small sisters and brothers when my father was on a rampage. We'd scramble to the driveway, climb into the car, and wait for our mother to burst through the front door and fling herself into the driver's seat. 4. The large walk-in safe was 19th century beautiful. Lots of brass and steel, lots of green and gold. So in 1973, when the U.S. Senate campaign I worked for moved its headquarters into that historic Salt Lake City office building, we immediately rigged an extension cord to a table lamp, pushed a thrift store sofa into the safe, and made it a coffee break room. The locking mechanism itself was disarmed, but there was no interior door latch, so when a volunteer night watchman fell asleep there and the heavy door somehow swung closed, unplugging the lamp and waking him all at once, he was trapped in total darkness until late the next morning when someone thought to check the safe. He was on the floor, collapsed and crying, and he told me later that he thought this must be what death feels like, a long dark night in a room with no windows or doors. 5. In order to save him from a life of crime, and I suppose to protect the citizens of Utah from him, the state incarcerated my 15-year-old brother for over a year in what was then called the State Industrial School. There, he'd be thrown into a small windowless cellar for up to a week at the whim of a guard. It's the only way to keep him safe, a social worker told our mother, from the pack of boys who'd already broken his wrist and pounded him raw and bloody on his first day allowed out into the barbed wire yard. 6. By the time I have to drill out a stripped screw to detach the last lock plate on the outside of a large cabinet, I've removed 31 locks, leaving only simple bathroom doorknob locks that can be popped with a hairpin. It seems probable to me now that the previous homeowners were locking someone, maybe children, inside these rooms and spaces. So I try hard to imagine what they were trying to protect their children from. Maybe they were trying to remove them from danger or temptation. Maybe they were convinced that this was a way to separate a child from her instincts, to protect her from her own raw impulses. Maybe one parent was trying to protect the children from the other. Stay in the closet until your father goes to sleep, my best friend's mother would whisper. Don't come out until I knock on the door. 7. When my father was finally hauled off by police after taking an axe to my mother's catalpa tree and then coming after my mother, I wanted him to be locked up. This is true. I was relieved to see him confined in that straitjacket, straps wound around his body, buckled tight so he couldn't move even his one good arm. And when they crammed his helpless, angry body into the back seat of that squad car, locking doors on both sides, I watched, and I began to breathe again. 8. Usually, when the next-door neighbor locked her 6 kids out of the house, she only meant to get some sleep. But some days, she'd push them outdoors early, slide the bolts, and storm through the small rooms for hours, cleaning, wiping, throwing clothes, dishes, toys into a garbage pile to be burned, while the children ran loose and hungry in the streets until long after dark. Late one cold night, when the kids had collected into a squirming mass of arms and legs against the unresponding kitchen door, another neighbor pushed through them and kicked the locked door in, and the children rushed through the brightly lighted breach to find their young mother crumpled on the clean bathroom floor, near the toilets, near the pills. 9. So today I fill this brown grocery bag with decommissioned hardware, tired of the blurred line between care and keep. Maybe all these locks and keys clanking in my wake are just another perilous trade-off we make in this world as we build an endless series of deliberate and accidental cages, where the air is thin and smoky, the keys always out of reach. Okay, so not done. So somebody told me this week, one of my students told me that we needed some happy, funny poems. I don't have very many of those, but I do have one. So I'll read you my only happy, funny poem. This poem takes place in 1974-75, so go ahead and get all your stereotypes out. They'll come in handy. It's called City Cemetery Love Poem, and it takes place in 1974. You should know that the cemetery that is talked about is the oldest cemetery in Salt Lake City. It's an old pioneer cemetery, and this isn't morbid. It's like a park. And long ago, when I first met John Hales, we used to wander through this park a lot, this cemetery, and treat it like a park. So, what else do you need to know? There are a few laws broken in the story, but they're you can't prove anything but at home, right? It's a long time ago. Okay, so there's two epigraphs. One is from a Mormon hymn, "The Spirit of God like a fire is burning," and it's from the writer was William W. Phelps, who was a Mormon pioneer, and he shows up, his grave shows up in the poem. And the other one is "Make Love, Not War," which we used to say over and over back in the day. We should probably be saying it still, in my opinion. So that's what this is about. We've walked a long time, talking and holding hands among loose shadows, putting a little distance between us and our noisy friends whose voices and guitar music trail around us in smoky corners, along city sidewalks until we climb over the stone wall and enter this pine and cedar sanctuary. We walk into the heart, past the dancing angel statue, past the Catholic section and the mausoleum to the oldest ancestors who must know we mean no dishonor when we stop to rest and share a fat joint at the resting place of William Phelps. Revered justice of the peace and poet of hymns whose stone reads, "There is no end to glory, there is no end to love." So we begin to kiss and touch each other's faces right there on that grave's long grass, and when the moon breaks full and high above the trees and Utah's bright September stars scatter themselves thickly, we fall into each other's arms, pulling off our shoes and shirts and pants and loving the mountain air and the quiet of the grave and the sense that we are somehow bringing joy to the ancient bones beneath us. We're so deep into our own nerve endings that we don't even hear the helicopter until it is directly overhead. And we laugh as it circles the cemetery, making its loud wop, wop, wop. "That's the sound of war," you shout into my ear. "We should continue making love." Which we do, with gusto. And when the helicopter comes back around, a white spotlight descends like the finger of God, just at the right moment. And we fall apart, laughing, and look up, breathless and happy and naked, surrounded by the angelic circle of light that levitates us a few feet above good brother Phelps. We feel blessed, floating between worlds, utterly untouchable by anyone above or below. When the helicopter turns off the spotlight and angles up and away, our bodies move back together. Your hands warm on my face, on my back, our sighs and murmurs once again audible among the dead. But it's the barking of the dogs in the distance that pulls us apart this time. And we are suddenly aware of a megaphone-enhanced police voice blaring from the east wall and the clamor of fanatical dogs advancing angrily in our direction. We leap to our feet and become two streakers, grabbing our strewn clothes, running south, dodging angels and other icons as we try to stick arms through tangled sleeves, brush off pine needles, and the dogs get louder. And I drop a shoe as I jump a low gravestone, and we dash naked track stars, trailing underwear and calling to each other. And I think about the consequences, because technically I'm still married to someone else. So the marriage is truly over, but I know we'll be embarrassed and they will search us for drugs and they will find them. Because neither of us thought to toss the extra joint from your shirt pocket and your family will hate me, and what about our jobs, and my children will think I'm a bad mother or worse. But we keep running across all those rested bones, and by some miracle, We stay ahead of the flashlights and the amplified voices and the insane dogs, and we hurdle that last wall onto the 4th Avenue sidewalk, joining hands, descending, and alive. So now, here's John Hales with his clothes on.
So you were married? This is also kind of a love story involving dead people, but it's my grandparents, and it's a project I began when I was rereading letters that my grandfather had written to my grandmother, my mother's father, from France during World War I, just a few months after. And it's grown into something kind of huge and overwhelming, involving now at least 2 wars, maybe more, and I've been cutting like crazy to get it down to size for tonight. So I hope enough is left to make sense. And it begins with a letter, and since this is nonfiction, I'm selecting from the letters, but I can't really edit, and I don't really need to. It's a pretty good writer. Okay, first letter. September 22nd, 1918, a little dugout at the front. It is raining all the time now, and the mud is ankle deep, all of which goes well with the rat-tat-tat of machine guns and the boom and whine of the big guns. Shells drop most uncomfortably near at times, but here there is so much for us to do that we haven't time to notice such small matters. Occasionally a shell drops a few hundred yards away and scatters mud and debris all over, but a miss is as good as a mile, if not quite as comfortable. Well, a little of this impresses one with the truth of the statement that war is hell, and whoever started this surely lifted the lid off hell, and no mistake. Love to Grandma and all, and kisses for you and the kids, Daddy. The grandfather Danvers who lives in my memory was already well into his old age. By the time I came along, Grandpa was usually napping, and when he wasn't, he'd sit unmoving in a drab, overstuffed chair at the end of the small living room, tapping his fingers rhythmically on the chair's worn arms, saying nothing and taking no notice of the busy life that unfolded around him. My mother and her 2 sisters stopping with their kids on their daily rounds, grandkids, great-grandkids, and sometimes neighborhood kids running noisily around, not taking much notice of him either. I was 12 when he died in 1965, 87 years old, and I'd spent the last few years of his life kind of obsessed with him. I studied his unmoving face, still handsome, not exactly frowning, not grim, but nothing humorous either, his furrowed, gaunt cheeks bristling unevenly with the gray stubble that defied my grandma's efforts to shave him each morning. He looked a lot like Harry Truman, I thought, the same stiff dignity, the thinning white hair. I wasn't scared of him when he was sitting in that chair or being guided by the arm into his bedroom by my grandmother, who walked alongside him with the same slow patience she brought to her care of all those grandkids, but with something else, at once more direct and familiar. But as soon as his bedroom door closed, we kids settled down, didn't talk above a whisper, usually moved our running around the backyard or down the spooky stairs into the partly finished basement. We stopped our routine banging on the piano, which somehow didn't seem to bother him when he was up, but when he was asleep, we were all afraid of him. It had to do with the war, his first one, the Spanish-American War, the war he'd fought when he was barely out of his teens, the first year of the 20th century. A year of quick naval victory over the Spanish in Manila Bay shifted quickly and inevitably into the American century's first, and certainly not its last, counterinsurgency operation, what American textbooks have euphemistically named the Philippine Insurrection. After the Philippines, he returned to civilian life, married my grandmother, was raising a family, and had a pretty good job at the railway mail service. Nevertheless, he volunteered in 1917 for service in the Great War. He was 38, a couple of decades past being subject to the draft, but still, he left his wife of 11 years and 2 children, 3 young daughters and a 10-year-old son named John, whose behavior they both worried about. In one letter, he said he loved the family photo Grandma had sent, but noted, "What's wrong with John's hair? It looks a little rough." Writing out to his family from that little dugout on the front, on the eve of the Meuse-Argonne offensive. The next letter we have, dated exactly 1 month later, October 22nd, 1918. Dearest, suppose you received my note of recent date scribbled on an envelope telling of an injury to my right hand and arm. Well, I am still laid up in the hospital and writing with my left hand. As I told you, I was hurt at the front, but I am many miles from the front now in a big hospital. Well, dearie, there isn't much to write about, and it's really awkward writing left-handed, so we'll close for this time. Well, dearie, take good care of yourself. I expect you will be a real husky by the time I return, won't you? Love and kisses to all, Wilford. This is the sum and extent of the information we have today concerning his wound. What we do know is that his outfit, nicknamed the Wild West Division because it had drawn from the western states, was thrown into the first wave of a battle and in less than a month would consume 54,000 lives on both sides and place Grandpa among more than 80,000 wounded Americans. A few days after Christmas 1918, not quite a month after the armistice and a week or so after leaving the hospital in Vichy, after a letter he had finally caught up with him, my Grandpa Danvers described this. No one who has not seen with his own eyes can ever picture the terrible devastation of northern France, a terrible, desolate hellhole. Words fail to picture, the mind cannot conceive the terrible horror of it all. No, not even in the minds and hearts of those who have been eyewitness to it. Well, dearie, it is not my intention to allow these somber thoughts to creep into my letters, but it's hard to forget once one has gone through it. I doubt that he ever did forget, which might account for his lifelong silence and the disdain he expressed for those who tried to remember through telling war stories and marching in veterans' parades. Still, we all knew that it wasn't memories of the Meuse-Argonne, the battle that had claimed so many lives and almost took his, that disturbed his sleep. During the final years of Grandpa's life, his nightmares returned him to the turn of the century, entangled in the lush green islands of the Philippines, the landscape of his first war, not the colorless, cratered no man's lands of France. The somber thoughts of what he'd experienced in the Philippines became the reason we moved quietly through our grandparents' house when Grandpa was sleeping, the reason we were afraid of what might happen if we woke him up, if we made the kind of noise that would jar him into abrupt and confused, perhaps violent attention. This is our letter. On sale from March 26, 1919. I never was so homesick in my life. I longed to take you in my arms and, oh well, what's the use of telling you? I get so ornery over here at times, I don't know what to do with myself. I think this is a hell of a war when I have a nice warm fire and a good bed that I can't share with you some 7,000 miles away. Love and kisses to all, from Wilford. There was a lot I didn't understand as a kid, but I knew that after sharing a good warm bed for years, before the World War and for many, many years after, my grandparents had begun sleeping apart in separate bedrooms. I'm trying to recall how my mother explained this to me, but the clear facts were these. He'd had nightmares about his own war in the Philippines, and he'd screamed, rose up, tangled in bed sheets, struggling with an invisible enemy. Perhaps he'd actually hurt Grandma. No one wanted to say. He certainly scared her and himself when he came to and recognized what he'd almost done. The second time this happened, they agreed that he should move into the spare bedroom. We understood a couple of quieter ways war had affected his life and his family's. Unlike just about anybody in his neighborhood, Grandpa refused to fly the flag on patriotic holidays, and he disdained anybody fool enough to join the American Legion or any other veterans organization, saying that nobody who had actually heard guns fired in anger would do anything remotely celebratory about war, and would do everything he could to put it behind him, to forget. I'm pretty sure I remember these exact words, hadn't heard guns fired in anger. And my mother, born, as she loved to say, exactly 9 months after her father had returned from France, would repeat these words for years to come, always wonderingly, puzzled momentarily as she, the good Republican girl he'd raised, planted our own flag into a socket mounted on the front of our house for Memorial Day. Our invasion of the Philippines began as an expression of America's imperialist ambitions, the logical and predictable extension of manifest destiny to the wide world that included Cuba, Guam, and Puerto Rico, where the fighting against Spanish defenders wound down within months, leaving the details of conquest, occupation, and colonization to diplomats. Spanish forces were also defeated quickly in the Philippines, but the American Army of Occupation immediately turned its sights on Filipino nationalists who viewed American colonial administration pretty much the way they viewed the hated Spanish, leading inevitably to escalating cruelties and atrocities, the all too common barbarities that characterize asymmetrical warfare when it's difficult for an army prepared to fight a traditional war, like the one Grandpa would fight 15 years later in France, to distinguish between soldiers and non-combatants. We don't have any letters Grandpa might have written to Grandma from the Philippines 5 or 6 years before they married. They met as teenagers, had been romantic before he left for the Philippines. In Plain City, Utah, the tiny farm community Grandpa's family had been directed to by his Mormon handlers after they had immigrated from England in 1887, when he was 10 years old. Theirs was an unlikely match and probably frowned upon. My grandpa's family, the Danvers, were fresh off the boat poor. She was a shirtlift, Mormon pioneer royalty, her grandfather an important Mormon leader, a judge, a state senator, a personage so prominent a peak that hovers 9,000 feet above the farms of Weber County had been named for him. We'll probably never know what Grandpa had done in the Philippines. As I said, none of his letters remain, and the only memories he gave voice to erupted only in his nightmares. But the letters survived from other Americans who remained in the Philippines years after the Spanish had been dispatched, facing resistance from a population mixed in its hopes for the future, but all suffering under confused and often vindictive American military operations led by officers who had learned their counterinsurgency tactics over the years in Wild West battalions of their own, fighting against the Apache and Sioux. One letter reads, quote, "We came here to help, not to slaughter these natives," but other letters tell a more troubling and violent story. One soldier wrote, "We bombarded a place called Melbourne, and we went in and killed every native we met, men, women, and children. It was a dreadful sight, the killing of the poor creatures. The natives captured some of the Americans and literally hacked them to pieces, so we got orders to spare no one." Another soldier, another Utah volunteer, wrote, "With an enemy like this to fight, it is not surprising that the boys should soon adopt no quarter as a motto and fill them full of lead before finding out whether they are friends or enemies." Another, "I am probably growing hard-hearted, for I am in my glory when I can sight my gun on someone and pull the trigger. Tell my inquiring friends that I am doing everything I can for Old Glory and for America I love so well." I can't remember with any useful specificity when I became aware that the United States was fighting in the war in Southeast Asia, let alone began to ponder more deeply the tangled and tragic specifics of America's counterinsurgency efforts in Vietnam. The year Grandpa died, 1965, I was in the 9th grade, and I'd been effectively insulated from the history unfolding around me by my prosperous Republican Cold War upbringing and school textbooks printed in the 1950s. 2 years after Grandpa's death, I found myself in a smoke-filled basement room of Ogden's American Legion Hall, sitting uneasily in a folding chair across the table from 3 Legion hat-wearing Legionnaires, asking me bourbon-fogged questions about my patriotism so as to measure my fitness for participation in the following summer's Boys' State. I guess I passed because that July, the summer before my senior year, I found myself on the Logan campus of Utah State University, issued a Boys' State t-shirt, assigned a place on the governing council of Manila City. Our mock cities were named after famous American battles. And later that week, I was pulled from my cafeteria lunch into a campus office by 4 serious, sober, non-hat-wearing Legionnaires who warned me that the mock legislation I proposed, a pathetically modest request for fictional funding to explore the historical roots of the Vietnam War, was not sufficiently patriotic, and to take it off the table and to not try anything like that again, ever. Although this helped, my getting a clue about Vietnam occurred incrementally and consistently behind the curve. In the same way, I incompletely understood the reasons for my grandfather's nightmares and what my grandmother thought about all this, and why his dreams unfolded in his first war in a landscape my older brother had described to me with his usual melodramatic exaggeration as a lush, dark jungle with faceless men dropping from trees to silently slit American throats. It was a place I could never picture, so unlike the landscapes of World War II, which filled the movie theaters and TV screens of my childhood. What I do know is this: when I began taking notice of photos in Life magazine and flickering newsreels on the evening news of our most recent Asian war, something clicked, began to make a kind of sense, and the connection was as immediate as it was only remotely accurate. I recognized the Vietnamese landscape as the one Grandpa had fought in, the high grasses and thick forests that disturbed his sleep so many years later, that drove him into that lonely room, the bed in which he slept so uneasily and alone. And then this last letter. Anse Lefant, February 26, 1919. Your letter has awakened an intense longing in me to be with you. I want you every minute. I always imagined that when a man got to be around 40, he sort of cooled down, but I believe I am worse than ever. It's getting late, dearie, so I must close and go to my lonesome bed. Wish you were here with me tonight. I would love you all night long if you would let me. Love and kisses to all, Wilford. I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Randa Jarrar.
Hi everyone, thank you all so much for being here. I want to just thank Fresno. Can I just thank Fresno? What a great place. Everyone here is a writer in this room. Yep, everybody here, which is beautiful. Very rare that I get to read exclusively to writers. So I thought what I would do today was kind of take you through basically like what my year has been like. And I can't be away from technology for more than 5 minutes. So I will share also with you just kind of what that looks like, what my year looks like. And I think all of us as writers tend to spend most of our time behind, oh my gosh, so many beautiful people here. So all of us as writers spend most of our time when we're writing, right? Like either sitting at a desk or standing at a standing desk if we're pompous assholes, like, what's his name, John Gardner? Seriously, there are dudes who write at standing desks. There are also dudes who apparently like to run, like Murakami. His whole writing practice is connected to his practice of running, which I think is super privileged. Like, I'm not gonna run unless there's a very large animal chasing me. Okay. So earlier this year, I don't know if any of you remember, Trump got elected. So the first thing I probably wrote this year, well, I write all the time and it's shitty, but the first thing I was able to share this year was right on Inauguration Day. So these are the words that Trump used. It's okay, I can't say it. Yeah, it's just waking up. So, The words that Trump said for the first time in any U.S. inaugural address were the following: bleed, carnage, depletion, disrepair, flush, infrastructure, Islamic, landscape, ripped, rusted, lady, sad, solidarity, sprawl, stealing, stolen, subsidized, tombstones, trapped, trillions, unrealized, urban, windswept.
You could try a different chord if you want.
No, I'll just read. And so I made a poem. Yeah, I do write poems sometimes. Just trying to keep it a secret. I wrote a poem just only using the words the words that Trump said, for the first time in any U.S. inaugural address. Nobody has ever used violent words like this. So here's my attempt at a poem on that poem. Rusted, subsidized, urban, Islamic lady. Solidarity and depletion, I trapped sad trillions, stealing carnage to flush away disrepair. An unrealized infrastructure, I bleed tombstones, a windswept, stolen landscape, my sprawl, unstoppable. That was just a really fun exercise, and for some reason the HuffPost is so cool. 2 weeks later, maybe more, you'll see here, March, I got a letter from a fan. Dear Randa, I'm passing along a brief poem on behalf of my brother, Jimmy Tiger. He read your article that published in The Sun and was moved to compose this piece. Why would he not send it to you? Why wouldn't he not send it himself, you may ask? Jimmy currently resides in Corcoran State Prison and does not have access to conventional modern technology such as email. If you want to correspond with him, I have included his current address below. I hope you enjoy his poem. All the best, Kevin Hawkins. Some sort of pill dealer, R&D. And proceeds to give me the address for Jimmy Tiger, which is P26517 blah blah cell some blah, and the jail that Charles Manson is in. I'm freaking out. Totally freaked out when I got this. So in case you're curious, this is the poem that he wrote, and it's incredible reading this, to realize, there's just so many cliches and about life presenting journeys, and no need for fear, you are whole again. This is directed towards me. Today you fly with dignity, today you fly with grace, high beyond what's kept you down, you rise, the phoenix in your private space. So I looked up who this dude was, and this is what turned up. A 31-year-old convicted murderer, white supremacist, and peacekeeper ordered a subordinate to stab a fellow inmate at the high-security prison at Sacramento, according to reports obtained by the AP. The subordinate, Wade Arthur Shiflett, was shot to death by a guard in the middle of the stabbing, according to the reports. Tiger had been accused of dozens of crimes, including ordering or carrying out assaults, selling drugs, smuggling weapons, and fomenting race riots, according to the documents. So if I'm weird sometimes, it's because I get fan mail from white supremacist murderers. What? I looked him up. I looked up his face. He's not even cute. Like, I know you were. I saw some people like, but no. So that was from January 29th. And a lot of the ways that I deal with pain is through social media and creativity and like making stuff, right? So pretty soon after that, I began an Instagram account called Crimes of Caucasity. It's an Instagram that documents Caucasus crimes. The tag is Caucasians Gone Caucate, and it's basically about crimes committed by Caucasians who are audacious. Caucasus. And they're audacious in their racism. So this is specific, to basically systemic racism and white supremacy and whiteness is property. So you can see here the kinds of things that are just so upsetting. Caftans and casseroles, anyone? This is just amazing stuff. So yeah, this was just a project I started as a joke. Like, I started a lot of things and nothing happens with them. But this one I started back in March, and it just picked up, and people started liking it and saying that it was helping them at work and along their day. So I'm pretty proud of that. One of the things here, oh, that's not gonna probably show it. Yeah, no, okay. I won't even need to make you deal with any of that. So that was earlier in the year. I'm gonna read to you guys a couple of things that I've worked on since then, in a more sort of traditional sense, like, oh yeah, I sat down and I wrote some stuff, and now I can read that stuff to you. One of those, well, maybe I'll take a rough, quick vote here. Who would be into, okay, two different things I could read right now. One is a short story about refugees, cats, and a group of competitive criers. The other is a piece of nonfiction, very creative nonfiction, probably a short story, who the fuck knows, genre is fake, about BDSM and Muslims getting it on. So these are the two things. So everybody probably needs to stretch anyway. So okay, so refugee story, cats, refugees, and I don't remember what else. Oh, competitive crying. Okay, and the other one is sexy, BDSM, Muslims. Good, because I'm gonna read both. Got my eye on the time though. I'm at 9 minutes. First I'm gonna read from the BDSM piece. And this is an essay that I wrote / creative nonfiction piece, that I wrote for Bitch magazine. They have an issue coming up in November, and the central thing is devotion. So they were like, what do you want to write about devotion? So I came up with this. I'm going to read to you just maybe a few pages from the essay, and what you're missing is that the speaker has been a dom with Abdullah, who is a Muslim Egyptian man, and now she's being a sub with a guy called Zahid. I met Zahid a year after I met Abdullah almost to the day. We both serendipitously wore red and white striped tops to our first date. I loved this because we looked like a Muslim version of Where's Waldo? Where's Habibi, I'd often thought. We talked about everything, including whether kink was in the Quran. When the Quran says to beat or whip someone, it never says how hard, he said, joking. Maybe it's soft play, I said. Islam means submission. I mean, to say I am Muslim is to say I submit. He smiled and said, or I'm a sub. We talked about how in one's devotion to God one yields completely. To be truly Muslim is to understand that God is the only being anywhere who wields any power. For a believer, Her submission means that she places all her trust in the divine and dedicates her love to the worship of the divine. To be Muslim is to be one who submits. Zahid told me he was hit by a train when he was 23. When I asked him how that happened, he said it was because him and his friends had been playing chicken with the train. I wanted to tell him how stupid that was, but instead I asked him if it was something he did regularly, play chicken with the train. He says yes. He did it all the time. He says that the time he was hit was the only time he paused to think about the train hitting him. He says he blames being hit on that pause. The train hit him and he spun in place like a dreidel. He spun and spun before he hit the ground. The spinning absorbed a lot of the contact so that when he hit the ground, he wasn't too severely head injured. He was airlifted to a hospital. 4 years later, he was diagnosed with testicular cancer. He has one ball. I pull on it gently when he's in my mouth to help him to come. Zahid's Islam is, like mine, more of an identity than a practice. Thank you. This is funny. We spent the first day of Ramadan getting stoned and driving 45 miles out of town to attend a LARP, or a live-action role-play game, where nerds gather in large spaces and pretend to be vampires. We arrived too early and I began jerking him off in the car a mile away from the exit. We ended up fucking in a parking lot for half an hour, him calling me a good girl. At the end of Ramadan, 30 days later, he came over and we drank Eid champagne. We pretended that the label read, halal, enjoy for Eid. In the morning, hungover, I asked him if he thought the pork chorizo I had in the fridge was bad. He smelled it and said he didn't know. I told him I didn't know anything about pork. He said he doesn't know anything about pork. We laughed. Two Muslims trying to make eggs and chorizo. It didn't happen. If you want to read the rest of that piece, you can pick up Bitch Magazine next month. I'm gonna read a tiny bit from the most recent thing I've written. I wrote this 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. And I apologize if you've heard this before. I read a part of this at Collect Coffee a couple weeks ago. So, Sob Fest. They called it Sob Fest. I heard about it from Adnan, the guy who works the head shop on Vermont and Hollywood. Adnan is a Syrian refugee. He moved to LA from Homs and we still haven't fucked, but I'm working on it. Hey Camellia, he says every time he sees me. Have I told you about these Americans I know who are doing a crying festival? Adnan says all this in Arabic, but I always respond in English because my Arabic makes me sound like a 4-year-old who isn't properly potty trained. You've told me about them, I say back to him and ask for a small box of coconut coals and a container of guava tobacco. Then comes the part where Adnan tries to get me to buy the double apple mint tobacco and invites himself over. I always say no. I hate the taste of licorice, I'll tell Adnan. I've already told you, plus I can't have you over just yet. My place isn't ready for guests. The last part wasn't a lie at all. My husband was living in my apartment, so it really wasn't ready for a visit from Adnan. You hate the taste of licorice? What kind of Arab are you, Adnan says, and I almost take out the card I laminated in my 20s, saying that I'm the kind of Arab who's also American. I love Araq, I assure him, don't freak out. Maybe I can drink Araq with you on the roof one day, he says, of your home? I'm convinced Adnan is married too, and that's why he never invites me to his place. Maybe, I say, but what about these criers? Tell me more about these criers. The festival's in 6 weeks, Adnan says, except he says it's in a month and a half. He doesn't measure things in weeks because he isn't a slave to capital. That's what he told me once as he was giving me back change. I asked Adnan where they were holding the festival, and he said it would be at the pier. He was coaching his neighbor Naomi, who had entered the festival and lost 4 years in a row. That's how he discovered the festival and got involved in it. When I tried to understand what Adnan's official role in the festival was, he told me it was difficult to describe. I cheered Naomi on. Each Sabr has a coach who helps them. It's strange to say I cheer her on. I sadden her on? I don't have an official title, but it's my job to collect her tears and enter the measurement in a tablet. How the fuck do you measure her tears? I asked Adnan. He bounced his brows up and down and told me I would have to see for myself. Later that night, I fired up my hookah, setting the coconut coals on the stove. My husband, Patrick, drank beer and watched hockey. Patrick is originally from Vancouver. I met him in a bar up there when I was investigating a piece and he was still bear trapping. I saw him at the edge of the bar standing with a small group of bear trappers and talking about the ethical dilemmas of their work. He was wearing a flannel shirt and a beanie over his black hair, and his neck boasted a large anchor tattoo. I wanted him to weigh me down, to go to the bottom of the ocean with him. I told him so 6 years in, and he took me home. 6 months later, he got a job with a union, we got married at the county office, and he moved in with me, leaving bears behind. I brought the hookah to the living room now and sat with Patrick and between our dogs, Sim Sim and Fin Fin. Patrick wanted to name them something Nordic, but I told him that I hated white people and didn't want my dogs having white names. He acquiesced very quickly because he's Canadian and wants to be cool, and because he understands that it's not really white people I hate, but white supremacy. After all, I love Patrick. I filled the top third of our living room with guava-flavored smoke, and Patrick curled his arm around me, which meant he also curled his arm around Fin Fin. I hadn't put out in over 2 months and didn't know how to tell Patrick that I'd fallen out of lust with him after he'd stopped trapping bears. That he was no longer an anchor at all, but more like a harmless, unsexy ducky skimming the surface of a tiny lake. I'm pitching a new story to Candace, I said. Candace is my editor at the paper. Oh yeah, what's it about? Patrick leaned over and took a few puffs from the shisha. It's about competitive criers, I said. He began to laugh. I'm serious. They cry competitively in public once a year. What do they cry about, he said. I'm not sure, I said. That's one of the reasons I want to write the story. Well, I think he'll do a bang up job, he said, because he's supportive and kind and he loves me, even though I'm a fucking monster. Candace loved the idea. I've heard of these weirdos, she said. Let's get you a press pass for the event and have you shadow them the next month. And so I began. Adnan introduced me to Naomi, and from there I hoped I would meet Nathan and Amber, the other 2 main competitors who had been scoring in the top 3 4 years running. I'm just gonna skip ahead to the festival because fuck it. Like that's all that matters is this crying festival. So this was inspired by, my brother is a bun boy. If you've ever seen Nathan's hot dog eating competitions on TV, my brother, Randa Jarrar, who was once deported by the United States for crimes of moral turpitude. He was like totally got into lots of bar fights and sold weed, but we kept him here. And that's a different story, a different essay. Yeah, he basically works the Nathan's Hot Dog Eating Festival. He wears no shirt. He wears a pair of American flag shorts and cannons t-shirts into the air while women eat hot dogs at a very, very fast pace. And they consume a lot of these hot dogs. And so he coaches, or he cheers on the Black Widow, and has like a thing where he counts how many hot dogs she's eating, like a big giant counter. I'm just gonna read a tiny bit of it. You know, I actually don't want to read any more from it. I know it's really weird, but I'm sure it'll come out soon and you guys can read it. I just don't want to give anything away. And also, it's rough. I'm gonna read it. I'll just read a tiny bit from when they get on stage. The announcer came up and introduced all the brands and companies that were sponsoring the competition. He wore an American flag suit, blue pants, red and white striped jacket, and a shirt speckled with glittery stars. Patrick said it was obscene because he's an expat. The crowd behind us cheered wildly when Nathan was introduced. 2 of Adnan's suited men carried him onto the stage, dancing to gospel music. When I saw Nathan, this is one of the competitors, I realized that he was white. This made me laugh, which was completely inappropriate at that moment. Nathan wore a t-shirt with his brother's face on it, the letters RIP emblazoned across. The MC asked the audience for a round of applause, the peer roared in solidarity. Then the MC introduced Amber. She came out smiling. The audience cheered, hoping for tears of joy. The MC spun it that way too. He said Amber had gotten great news recently and that she was hoping to be America's next Happy Tears heart. Patrick played with my hair. I could tell he was falling for it all. And then the section where the Jumbotron starts. The contestants had counters above their crying station, announcing the amount of grams they cried. 5 minutes into the race, the majority were solidly at 200 grams or below. Amber, Naomi, and Nathan were at around 700 each. This was close. The Jumbotron screen showed each of their faces. Nathan's tears were medium-sized and streamed from his face down to the receptacle. Amber's were tiny, and she laughed as she released them, adjusting her face since they were projecting almost like spit. Naomi's were the same as ever, large droplets falling as if from a faucet. Except now they are falling even harder, steadier. Behind her, I could see part of Adnan's lapel, his Adam's apple bobbing as he encouraged her. The 60-second timer began. Amber was at 710 grams and Nathan was at 720. Naomi was at 725. Over the next minute, she cried a gram per second. The audience was wowed and cheered wildly. When the buzzer sounded, she was at 780 grams. Nathan was at 730 and Amber was still at 710. Confetti shot out from either side of the stage, announcing the end of the competition. The blue dots fell over our shoulders and hair, and when I fished one out of Patrick's beard, I saw that it was in the shape of a tiny teardrop. Adnan embraced Naomi and cheered, but Naomi was still weeping. The MC gave her a giant fake check and she accepted it, but kept her face in a hanky to stop her tears from sponging the ink. Adnan held the check for her. The man behind us clapped wildly and leaned in to Patrick and said, "See that? That's America." Happy Latinx Heritage Month, everyone. Just wanted to remind everyone that Monday was Indigenous Peoples Day. Hope you have some plans to read some Indigenous peoples' writings this month and every month. Again, thank you all for being here, and please welcome my colleague, Tim Skeen.
I promise I will end on a poem that I've been told is funny. Systemic lupus. Lupus is most commonly diagnosed by a characteristic butterfly rash on the face. The rash is only the body's way of holding on to fire. Everybody agrees Nola's done exactly that for years. She washes the windows at the end of March, and I say, "You'd better get down off that stool. You'll catch a cold." None of us know she's already sick. She sweats, then chills over the stove, over the ironing, but she shakes her head, smiles, and keeps on. When she goes out, she carries her own drinking water to go with the pills. She's outlived her parents, 4 brothers, a son, and stray dogs named after their mongrel passing, Tinker, Tamper, Shaggy. Why can't she accept this gradual slowing down? Why can't she outlast this burning across her face, this disease so frightened of her that even the medical books admit it comes disguised as a butterfly? A poem not sanctioned by the Human Subjects Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. There is such a thing. Someone tired of the office chair, or someone tired of walking around the chair in the hallway, rolled it out of doors to the 4th floor stairwell. 2 pigeon eggs, almost the size of supermarket eggs, side by side on the sticks. White against the blue of the chair in the shade, made me bring my incredulous daughter to see the nest and its eggs. We crept up the steps like a couple of Manx cats without bells, to see the blinking eyes of the sober pigeons for ourselves. Other birds cooed back and forth, somewhere we couldn't see. Iris and I looked at each other, and then we slowly left. She wants me to bring her back. I've told her that we can't touch the eggs because the mother would abandon them. Is this true? I've watched starlings be eradicated from city trees with fire hoses. And I've noticed broken eggs at the foot of aluminum ladders below the eaves and gutters of apartment buildings. Isn't that the lesson of necessity? Some things must die for the sake of public health and safety. She's just old enough to understand it now. Still, it's going to hurt her soul. It's going to mature her. It's going to make her become more like us. She's in college now. Some of you may know I have been an American Red Cross National Disaster Volunteer for around 20 years. So this is my new book. I'll be reading in the spring, so I'm saving all my new work, as Stephen is, for that reading. But by then, this book is on sale tonight, by the way, so by then it'll be an old new book. Melody. John and I look at the upright piano. Hell, he says, we can do it. The strange thing is, I believe him. With a little rope, we could move a battleship. Next time, he says, we'll probably get the floor safe. The moment we sling the ropes, the piano, if it had ever been in tune, goes out of tune, playing Charles Ives chords with every bump. The chapel of each day. There were days when the wind blew sweet all the way from Canada, and the smell of the plowed fields and the silage seemed to be coming from my own lean body. That was a long time ago, right? Early in the morning, traveling east, the sun rising on the flat horizon dazzled me like the thought of having a child. Sometimes I'd stop for bacon and eggs with coffee, cream and sugar. I felt I could drink Paul Bunyan-like the whole pot. Once I bought potatoes from a farmer in the parking lot. He said to his young son, "Now this is what we like to see, a hungry man," as he gave my change in onions. Welding for Tony Thomas. As your father taught, you prepared the metal to receive the arc. The wire brush, the slag hammer, and the grinder brightened the surfaces to be joined. Now his tools belong to you, and with them you inherit what he left unfinished. The log splitter's hydraulic arm, which again snaps from its mounting bracket with the last cord of oak. This is perhaps how you and your father loved each other best, using the welder's skill to repair a machine that splits logs into firewood. And I read this poem with sincere apologies to Keats on first looking into Google Earth. Little do I travel now that I'm old, though many nice bed and breakfasts have I seen when younger, especially on the Isle of Man, of which travel agents have seldom told. But my young friends, Dawn and Ray, hold that one doesn't need to take a vacation in order to travel to a different destination. I thought, posh, until I downloaded Pure Gold in the Sergey Brin and Larry Page program bold. Then felt I like some anime cartoon goddess with all her horde of eagle-eyed groupies, silent, staring at every wonder of the earth, from Tokyo to Brighton to Perth, except for those blocked out for security purposes. Thank you.
coming. Please join us for our modest reception. Buy books for our students.